Welcome to another episode of our channel. In this video, we will discuss the green light given by the Pentagon for sending Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, with the political decision now entirely in the hands of President Trump. This Friday, October 31st, a CNN report, citing 3 officials from the United States and Europe involved in the matter, reported that the Pentagon had given the green light for the provision of Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, with effective dispatch now depending only on a political decision that only President Trump can make. According to the report, the Pentagon assessed the inventories, the pace of production of new missiles, and Ukraine's needs, concluding that the shipment of these missiles will not affect either the stocks or the operational capacity of the United States. But why does Ukraine so desperately need these missiles? The Tomahawk is a long-range cruise missile developed by Raytheon and is one of the main weapons of the United States Navy. It is known for its precision, capability to hit distant targets, and for operating in a low flight profile, making its detection by enemy radars difficult. It was specifically designed for precision attacks, aiming to destroy strategic installations without causing much collateral damage. Historically, Tomahawks have stood out in numerous conflicts, such as the Gulf Wars, in Bosnia, and in various operations in the Middle East. And now, Ukraine hopes that the transfer of these missiles will strengthen their deep strike capabilities in Russian territory. With the front line increasingly stagnant and soldiers involved in a long, slow, and cruel war of attrition, Ukrainians are increasingly dedicated to hitting the Russian rear, especially the means Putin uses to finance his war, such as refineries and gas and oil terminals, through which these commodities are sold to countries like China, India, Turkey, and Brazil. By hitting these targets, Ukraine tries to hinder Russia's war effort by reducing its financing options, a strategy that in a long and costly war of attrition like this could force Putin to lessen the pressure and, in the long run, even force him to sit down with the real intention of negotiating the end of his invasion. According to the CNN report, the Pentagon, after a thorough evaluation, concluded that the provision of Tomahawks to Ukraine would not harm the United States missile reserves, with this detailed analysis suggesting that American missile stocks are sufficient to maintain operational readiness. The Pentagon also assessed the capacity of the American defense industry to produce more Tomahawk missiles, so that the sale of these missiles can be quickly offset with newly manufactured ones. However, despite the Pentagon's positive technical opinion, the political decision still depends on Trump, who continues to show considerable hesitation. In early October, President Trump made statements that seemed to indicate a certain inclination to supply missiles to Morocco, even saying that the United States had large stocks and that therefore there would be no problem in selling some to Ukraine through NATO. However, after a phone conversation with Putin that lasted 2.5 hours, Trump changed the tone of his statements, announcing a new meeting with Putin in Budapest, and saying that after all, stocks were limited, and that, in addition, teaching Ukrainians to use the missiles could take up to a year, which could even require the presence of American military personnel in Ukraine for the direct operation of missile launchers, something Trump said he would not do. With this Pentagon opinion, the obstacle raised by Trump regarding a supposed limited stock falls apart, with the other obstacle, the difficulty of operation, also raising doubts among specialists, who doubt Trump's given timeline of up to a year to teach Ukrainians to launch the missile, especially when we see how Ukrainians were able to adapt Western missiles such as the Storm Shadow in Soviet-era planes. There's also the question of how the missiles would be launched. Traditionally, since it is a missile developed by the Navy, Tomahawks are fired from warships or submarines, which means it would be necessary to provide land-based launch systems, which, although relatively rare, exist and are already used. But despite still being hesitant, Trump also gave signs of distancing from Putin by canceling the announced meeting in Budapest. claiming Russian insistence on unrealistic demands to accept a ceasefire in the war, a distancing that could facilitate a favorable political decision to supply these missiles to Ukraine. It is worth remembering that Putin declared in front of journalists that if Ukraine uses these missiles against Russian installations, the Russian response will be overwhelming, once again raising the specter of the threat of the use of tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine. Something that is important to remember is legally provided for in the new Russian nuclear doctrine, signed by Putin in 2024, that allows the use of nuclear weapons even against non-nuclear nations, as is the case of Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky has argued that by the end of the year, Ukraine should have consolidated deep strike capabilities, a reference to Ukrainian efforts aimed at developing its own long-range missiles such as the Flamingo, a missile with a range and payload capacity even greater than the Tomahawk, able to travel up to 3,000 kilometers with more than a ton of explosives. But it is not as stealthy and precise as the Tomahawk and is therefore seen more as a complement to American missiles. The approval of the provision of Tomahawks to Ukraine by the Pentagon marks a new phase in U.S. support for Ukraine's war effort against Russia. But it is important to emphasize that this was only a technical decision, with the political decision depending on numerous other factors, like Trump's fear of further escalating the conflict. But it is undeniable that this weapon, if it reaches Ukrainian hands, will represent an additional tool to further affect Russian capacity to maintain its war effort, something that could potentially even force Putin to sit down to negotiate the end of his invasion, which is about to reach 4 years. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any updates.